Hi everyone, it's Trent here. Hope you're doing well, guys. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you again in my current workspace. I'm going to be talking to you about the question of beauty, asking ourselves, what does beauty mean? It's a difficult question, of course, a question that I also started a thread about on a forum, INFJ's forum, that I'm a member of, and there was an interesting discussion that was happening around that topic. And as part of my current exploration into the domain of open aesthetics, I've been really inquiring into the nature of beauty, particularly the nature of beauty in relation to art. Because it's from the moment that you start asking the question about beauty, about art, about what is the essence of beauty, what is the essence of art, what is the relationship between beauty and art, you realize that behind these questions are hidden a lot of other questions. The first thing that seems to me quite obvious is that we cannot really say much about the relationship between beauty and art as long as we haven't really defined what art is, what beauty is. And does beauty exist independently of art? Does art exist independently of beauty? So if you, for example, we consider the first question, does beauty exist independently of art? We have not really defined beauty yet, so you might say, well, it's can't answer as long as beauty has not been defined. But at the same time, it's a very tricky thing, because if we were to define beauty in such a way that we would then be able to say that it does not require art for its definition, we're kind of defining beauty circularly in a way. We're begging the question about beauty. So perhaps we could try to consider the common sense or intuitive answer that we can give to the question, does beauty exist independently of art? Is there such a thing? And I think the intuitive answer to this question is probably yes. Yes, there is such a thing. When you consider, for example, let's say to use a maybe slightly banal example, you know, the Machu Picchu in Peru, or if you consider, well, actually, maybe that's a bad example, because is that completely natural? Arguably not. But if you say Mount Everest, for example, Mount Everest, you see Mount Everest. You want to say, well, it's an example of natural beauty. There's no art involved. It's a tricky question because, for example, as far as I'm concerned, I've never seen Mount Everest. You know, I've only seen it through the medium of of a man-made product in some kind of way, whether it be a photograph or, but even, if I go walk in nature and I can see maybe experience a beautiful lake, a beautiful pond, a beautiful fur of an animal, intuitively there seems to be a whole context demarcated for the possibility of beauty not being connected with art. In a world, theoretical world, in which humans didn't produce any art, would there still be beauty? That's not for sure, because the other question here is beauty something that can only be recognized by human being? And if so, well, human being, if human being didn't produce arts, human being would not be human being, and therefore perhaps there would be no beauty. So these questions are very complicated, but let's say that someone could theoretically, and as part of a thought experiment, never encounter any work of art and still experience the beauty of a natural landscape. So at least, this thought experiment seems to suggest that it's possible for things to be beautiful that are not artistic as such. Now the question whether art makes sense outside of the question of the beautiful is perhaps a more complicated question. Because one may have an intuitive, again, starting from intuition, an intuitive reaction by saying, no, it's, you know, art is principally concerned with the beautiful, and I guess in many ways, traditionally understood, the traditionally understood discipline of aesthetics and philosophy seems to deal with the nature of art as part of the nature of beauty, or as the nature of beauty as part of the nature of art. So taking for granted that art and beauty are deeply connected, and that although beauty may have independent existence, so to speak, from art, art doesn't. But there might be people who disagree with this. People who say that that you can be an artist and aim for the ugly, or aim for the creation of things, works of art that are not really concerned with the beautiful, or at least with the intuitive understanding that people have of the beautiful, but maybe artists that are there to challenge, to call into question preconceptions, maybe even preconceptions regarding beauty. The complication here is obviously if an artist wants to challenge the preconceptions of an audience regarding, you know, standards of beauty, in a sense, then art, even for those artists, depends on beauty, because it is dialectically defined in terms of beauty, even though the objective is to challenge that standard. It still takes it into account. So in a way, beauty as traditionally understood still contributes to the origin and making of the work that questions the nature of beauty. You could use the example of postmodern art, for example. So it's not clear. At least, you know, I think a case could be made. You could, you know, it would be possible, and perhaps, in my opinion, the most promising avenue, or one of the most promising avenue, would be to say yes, art is concerned with the nature of beauty, and is concerned with beauty to an extent. Beauty takes part in the definition of art. But maybe beauty can be defined in such a way, a maximalist way perhaps, which might include what is considered art nowadays that would not be seen as traditionally beautiful. Like the works of Murakami, or, you know, abstract expressionism, and a lot of other, you know, kinds of art, contemporary arts. And this really then asks the question: so how can we define beauty? It seems that perhaps it's perhaps, if beauty can exist independently of art, but art cannot exist independently of beauty, then in a way, beauty ontologically precedes art and is presupposed by art. Which in turn suggests that what we have to define first is beauty, because we do not need to define it in terms of art. We do not need to refer to art in the definition of beauty, whereas we will have to refer to beauty in the definition of art. So we cannot, on pain of circular reasoning, of begging the question, we cannot begin with the definition of art. We need to begin with the definition of beauty, and then try to articulate a definition of art. So now that has been said, well, you know, I'm taking inspiration from my own work here, of course, in my notebook. The question becomes: how can we define beauty in a way that encompasses human subjectivity? People say beauty is subjective, or at least beauty is experienced as mediated subjectively in some way. People might find something beautiful that others do not. There's certain landscapes that are would be seen traditionally as beautiful. Some not at all natural things, like, you know, paintings, works of art of various kinds that make very little use of the natural, and yet is created and stakes a claim for beauty. But here we're already kind of defining beauty in terms of art, so we have to be careful. So, I mean, we're really like in the sort of thick of the question here, like how to define beauty in a way that doesn't actually assume too many things about art, about human experience, about the structure of human experience and judgments. That doesn't say beauty is subjective, because that doesn't really say anything about beauty. Beauty is subjective is only, suggesting that one way of experiencing beauty is by reference to a subjectivity, which in itself is a very complicated and questionable term, and people would be hard-pressed, I think, to provide a satisfactory definition of what it means to experience something subjectively. So it would be quite interesting to try and see whether we could find a definition of beauty that is, or a description. The phrase that I use in my notebook is a definitional description. Since we're trying to not assume anything, and we're trying to be very experience-based, intuitive, to maybe attempt to describe beauty. If we take beauty to be almost like a kind of elementary concept, very difficult to analyze further into a more basic concept. Maybe beauty is what I call aesthetic in my notebook. It's a primary concept in a way. Well, the way in which I have found a lead for the definition of beauty is to say, well, beauty, we can say that which we call beautiful, we usually call that which we experience. So we have an experience of something which we consider beautiful, let's say. So we have an experience of something. So if you have an experience of something, the question is, what kind of thing do we have an experience of? Now, in my ontology, as some of you may know, I use events as my basic unit. So an event unity, a unity of events would be, if it is a human being, it is a certain kind of unity of events. If it is a thing, if it is an object, what we call an object from the point of view of a subject, it's another unity of events. Any situation is a unity of events which can be seen through different folds, different perspectives. So let's say that what we call beautiful is something that we experience as what we call an object, but which I would call an event. But by event, I don't just mean something that happens. I mean like a complex concatenation of unities of taking place. We say, okay, so this, what I'm looking at, evokes, it's beautiful, what is it? So there's something very primal that happens here, and to define it is quite difficult. A definition that I have come up with that I consider to be quite promising is to say that beauty is that, whatever is beautiful is that which gives its presence for free. So obviously I need to explain a little bit what I mean by this. So if you engage in any kind of situation, most of the time you engage it with a practical goal in mind. So instead of the situation being experienced just for what it is experienced in so far as you need to do something with that situation to continue across your day-to-day. If you go and sit in front of your laptop, you do it to type, communicate with people. If you drive, if you go to the shop, if you go out drinking, if you meet up with friends, none of these experiences are what you would call beautiful. It's a strange sound to call that beautiful. When you use a particular piece of equipment to say like if you're a joiner, carpenter, and you work with wood, you use certain pieces of equipment, your equipment you would not call beautiful. And I think and this is a very important point to emphasize here, I think that the reason why these situations, and when I say situations, I mean like broad unities of events, they do not evoke beauty because we do not take them as a giving of their presence. We take them as given. And when I say we take them as given, we say like it's something that is, it's like a raw datum that is given to us experientially to do something with. So if I see a hammer, if I have a hammer in my hand, the giving, there's two ways in which the hammer manifests its presence to me, in the way in which I relate to this hammer. There's two main ways in which it manifests its presence. I think it manifests its presence and I call these the two folds of the presencing of the hammer. First, as a given tool. So you have the hammer, but it's something that I take as something to do something with, not just as a hammer to be looked at as it is in itself. Okay, and then as giving, and giving would be literally giving its presence. So instead of something that is given to me to do something with, a hammer as giving would be a hammer literally just as it is. And then I would start asking myself questions instead of just doing things with the hammer that's a given data, my experience. It's given of something. Maybe it would evoke memories in which I'm reminded of things that happened in relation to, maybe I worked on some repairing of things with a distant family member at some point. I'm reminded of it. I become aware of the hammer as a presence rather than as a given presence. And what I consider to be evocative of beauty or of the beautiful, it's not necessarily what's giving, because you could say, well, the hammer then in certain situations is beautiful. Often, and it's an example that Heidegger uses in one of his books, the objects of our everyday life, by virtue of being called objects, they are already subjectively mediated. They're not taken as things, they're not taken as giving presence, but as given, since they are objects. There are things for us to do something with. But sometimes objects stop working, or like a lamp stops working and a building collapses. Things surprise us. We cannot predict the whole behavior of their givenness to us. And I think in these cases we do become aware that there is a givingness to the object that is no longer an object by virtue of its showing its presence as giving for a particular amount of time before it retracts into givenness. Now, what I call the beautiful is what gives for free, which means that it is the primary mode in which we relate to things that are beautiful, that they are giving. Instead of, for example, if you take a tool, it is primarily given, and when it malfunctions or when it surprises us in some way, it's giving for a short period of time. If you reverse that, if there are things in life that we relate primarily as giving, not as given, then I think that we are very close to a definition of the beautiful. Except that we have to specify the definition a little bit further, because there is a unity of events, a very well-known unity of events that we recognize in the world, that is primarily giving to us, but that we would not call beautiful. And it is literally other human beings. We sometimes say that human beings have freedom, free will, freedom of choice. They make decisions. When you're dealing with a human being, another human person, you don't take that person as by default as given, as someone to do something with. Sure, when you're at the workplace and you're like a CEO, like you have assistants, and in many ways that's how you relate to these people, but it's in a circumscribed area. And even in these contexts, whenever there's a discussion, whenever there is an opening up to another person, you're opened up to the possibility of they surprising you. And they're not just given to you as someone to do something with. They have their own givingness to you. But it is a givingness that is always at the same time a kind of threat on your own givingness and your own freedom and your own openness onto things. There's always, in recognition of the givingness, of the default givingness of another human being, a recognition of the potential threat that this person represents for us. We're counting on the fact that they're going to behave nicely. Perhaps also because they're expecting the same thing of us. So there are like social contracts, norms in common, all these things that humans devise socially speaking. So you could say that in the case of the relationship with beings endowed with what I call open will, which you can call it freedom in ordinary language terms, you could say the transactions with these people, there are transactions in givingness, but it does not come for free. There is a threat. And there's often a relationship of power there. So it doesn't really count as beautiful, but I think we're closer to the definition. We're closer to what I want to describe as the beautiful. So how about the beautiful is a unity of events, a situation that is experienced as giving its presence for free, which means that it is not given, it's not something that we do something with. When we experience a beautiful work of art, when we experience something that really arrests us, you know, when you look at, I don't know, think about an amazing work of art that you love, you've been in its presence. You don't think about it as something that you do something with. You don't think to yourself, right now I'm here because I want to enhance my knowledge of art, or I want to provide myself with aesthetic sensory pleasures. You never think that to yourself. I mean, it could be at the back of your mind, but if it is at the back of your mind, it is not default. It's not a default mode in which you engage the situation. The situation is engaged by default as giving of its presence, and it does something to you rather than being given to you to be done something with for your practical purpose at each stage of the day. Unlike, and that's what I suggest, anything else that is not beautiful. So the beautiful is the giving of its presence for free. And once I have said that, the question becomes, how can we define art? And a tentative definition could be, art consists in the creation, because, you know, human being is a creative being, and a lot of what we create is by no means art. It's not true that art and creation are or creativity are synonyms. I was using an example in my notebook recently. You know, imagine that you're like bored, you're waiting for a friend, and you're supposed to show up at your house, and you don't know what to do. You shut down your computer because you thought your friend would be on time, and then they're not on time. And so you're just hanging in your sofa, and for some reason you find yourself like passing the time by making up words in your mind, you know. A sun stare, kind of stare that the sun has when you look at it, or a ghostful, like, you know, the condition of being full of ghosts. I mean, these are examples that I use in my notebook. You could also say, well, you build a castle of cards to pass the time while your friend's supposed to arrive. Well, these are creative activities in an objective sense. Would you say that they're artistic activities? They're not. And perhaps it is because they're objective. What they are directed towards is not beauty. Beauty, understood in this rather broad sense, you understand, as that which is giving of its presence for free. You see that this is not at all a traditional understanding of beauty in terms of sensory experience, sensory pleasure, anything. It's much broader, and it would very much welcome approaches to beauty that are postmodern, that are, as long as it does that, gives something. You go back and you felt in a certain way, you're inspired to do something, it evoked an emotion, a memory. Whatever it does to you, gives something to you, rather than be given to you for you to do something with, which in a way is practical, but it is also a little bit less profound. And so maybe that's the profundity of the experience of art, when you experience a work of art, or the experience of a beautiful landscape, or the experience of a beautiful face, beautiful car, because, you know, like some people will even find cityscapes, even sometimes factoryscapes, to be beautiful. Music. And so the question about art is far from settled, you see, because it's not so easy to say, okay, art is the activity which consists in creating something whose nature will be by default to give itself to the spectator, let's say, or to the experiencing person for free. Because how do you do that? And maybe in another video I will tackle the question that is, I think, the crux of the matter here, and the productive paradox that I think I have more or less solved in my notebook, but I'm not sure yet, is that if art consists in creating the presentially giving, then surely it begins from a situation in which the presentially giving is not present, it's absent. But then if it is absent, then it cannot really be giving yet. And in the same way, you could say that the artist begins by working on material that is given to him or her or them to produce something. So the aim is to produce something. And so there is a practical purpose which is definable in terms of practicality and not in terms of beauty. But this would be almost the same as saying, well, this is how we're going to create, we're going to build this car. So what's the difference? Building a car, a table, building a work of art. Maybe by virtue of being absent, beauty provides the vision and the momentum of the artistic process, of the creative activity. And by being that towards which the artist is headed, it is giving of its presence already, except that it is not giving of its presence as it would be in front of a spectator. It is giving of its presence to the creator as the goal, as the telos. See you soon, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll have probably some more videos on this topic in the future. See ya.